Thank you, Minister. It's a pleasure for me to stay here in Singapore, and of course I accept your invitation to stay in future occasions, in occasion of the Formula One here in Singapore. Of course I would try to find out a vehicle on a car to race. No, actually, there is a very important Mexican pilot, driver, as we were saying, that yesterday arrived in second place after starting at 12th place, and it was a very exciting race. But good luck with this event. Now let me address you, dear friends, and talk a little bit about Mexico. Probably if you could see a map, when I talk with the students, I said, if you analyze, we are exactly in the middle of the world. We are in the middle of America, and actually we have 3,000 kilometers of border with the United States, the largest market in the world still. And at the same time, we are part of North America, but we are part, at the same time, proudly part of Latin America. We share the Pacific Ocean with these powerful economies, the Asian tigers, included Singapore. But also we share the Atlantic Sea with Europe and Africa. We have access to the west coast of the United States and to east coast of the United States. And according to that, only talking about the privileged geographical condition of Mexico, we proposed ourselves at the beginning of my administration to transform the Mexican economy in order to make one more competitive and able to generate jobs, which is our main goal in the government. In order to do so, we started to work in several fields, implementing economic reforms. Please. So the first effort that we made was macroeconomic stability. In the past, Latin American economies, including Mexico, used to suffer a lot from macroeconomic instability, high deficits. Nevertheless, Mexico has right now a very stable period, which has been very useful for us in order to face these difficult economic times in the world. At the same time, we continue a very aggressive process of trade liberalization in the country, according with our philosophy that the markets have the ability to liberalize not only merchandise, but also liberalize the people and the countries. So we do believe in free trade, and in that sense, one of our main public policies was to trade liberalization. According to that, we introduced a new process of tariff reduction in Mexico, even in the middle of the crisis. I used to say that when we met in the G20, for instance, several years ago, one of the favorite clauses that we approve is this expression about we are against protectionism. We reject protectionism. However, the day after, 15 out of 20 countries of the G20 established new tariffs and new obstacles to trade. That is not the case of Mexico. We started, even in the middle of the crisis, a very important process of tariff reduction. And in that sense, we reduced from 12% to 4% the tariffs on average with countries without free trade agreement with us. Other field of our reform was deregulation. We erased in the year 2010 16,000 rules, norms, regulation, red tape obstacles for enterprises. And we are being very active investing in infrastructure. Actually, through several mechanisms, we passed from 3% of GDP of investment in infrastructure to 5% of GDP a year in Mexico, either public and private investment. And in order to do so, we passed in the Congress a new law in order to promote public and private association, public-private partnership, TPP projects. We presented to public opinion and investors at the beginning of my administration a very ambitious infrastructure program, which has been the main route for the transformation of the country. And finally, we have invested a lot in education, mainly technician education and social policy, in order to overcome the situation of a lot of people in our country. And the point is that these reforms have resulted in increase in trade, competitiveness, and economic growth for our country. Talking about macroeconomic stability, you can see that Mexico has one of the lowest levels of deficit and public debt in the OECD. You can see in the left part of the graph the fiscal deficit in the last year, and that is including even some investment which by law is out of the budget. For instance, all the investment of Pemex is out of the budget. If you include that, Mexico has 2.5% of deficit to GDP. That if you compare with the rest of countries of OECD, the average in OECD is 6.6%, so Mexico has a very low level. And according to the law, without the investment of Pemex, we have a deficit of 0.4% of GDP, which is right now in these times in particular a very good advantage for the country. And in the right side of the graph, you can see the public net debt in terms of percentage of GDP. So you can see, for instance, well, I'm not talking about Greece, you know, we have a serious problem there, but talking about Portugal, Italy, Ireland, and so on, most of the countries, Japan, for instance, has a debt of more than 100% of GDP. Mexico has only 32% of GDP in terms of our public debt, which is very low. Actually, our foreign reserves today are able to pay more than twice our total external debt. Another factor of stability, of course, is inflation. I admit it's high considering some parameters around the globe, but considering Latin America, Mexico has a stable macroeconomic environment, even in terms of inflation, 3.4% last year, which is one of the lowest in the region in Latin America. And comparing with other countries that you could see there, in particular the BRICS countries, our inflation is lower and our interest rates are lower as well. That's another part of our advantages. Now, talking about the liberalization process of trade in Mexico. Mexico has preferential access to 44 countries, which means free access to more than 1 billion of consumers around the world. Now, Mexico, you can compare with other countries in the region, and again, we have the highest number of free trade agreements. Now, talking about the economic growth, we are expecting that figures is coming from the OECD. However, this estimation of Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development is below the real estimation we have, that almost all the agencies are saying that we will grow this year 4%, which is not too high comparing with Singapur, of course, but considering the country members of the OECD, Mexico will have the second biggest economic rate of growth for this year, just after Chile, our good friends of Chile. The rest of the economies of the world are behind us, and of course, you can see in the right part of the graph all the problems mainly in European Union, with a lot of troubles and suffering a lot from the current economic situation. Now, let me talk about competitiveness of the country. All these measures regarding infrastructure, deregulation, trade liberalization, and so on, have moved Mexico in better places in terms of competitiveness. And you can see that in several ways. One of these is some parameters. Mexico advanced 20 places on the World Bank's Doing Business Index between 2006 and 2012. So you can see when I took office, Mexico had the 73rd place, and now we have the 53rd place. It's not enough, and we know that the first place is exactly occupied by Singapur, but nevertheless we are expecting to reach those parameters in the future, and we are moving ahead, well, we say in a very good pace. We need to move even forward. But the point that I want to emphasize is that today, Mexico has a better place than other countries similar to us, in particular the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, in terms of Doing Business Index of the World Bank. Other way to see that is the success of the manufacturing exports of Mexico. You can see the graph. So right now, our country is exporting more manufactured goods than the rest of Latin American and Caribbean countries combined, including Brazil. That means that 60% of the total manufacturers in Latin American and Caribbean region are Mexican manufacturers. And we are exporting since smartphones, and actually we are probably one or the most important exporter of smartphones in the world, to plasma TV, to flat TVs, to vehicles, and automotive industry, and other like that. Other aspect that I want to emphasize is 6 years ago, the market share of Mexican products in American imports was below 10%, and today is almost 13%. So we are increasing not only in absolute numbers our export, but also the market share of Mexican export to our main client, which is the American market. Other point, well, talking about vehicles, for instance. 6 years ago, when I took office, Mexico was the 9th largest exporter of vehicles. And today, we are the 4th largest exporter of vehicles in the world. Actually, we surpassed the United States this year. And with that, Mexico is really getting a quite important competitiveness in automotive industry. Talking about only 2012, we are starting new projects from Greenfield with companies, new facilities for coming from investment like Mazda, for instance, Honda. And just this week, I announced a new investment of Audi, an investment of $1.3 billion. And Audi is establishing its first facility, its first plant in the whole America, and exactly in Mexico. Probably this is one of our most competitive sectors in manufacturers. You can see another data is the 8th largest producer of vehicles, 4th largest exporter. I mentioned it already. Mexico has been the biggest receptor of foreign direct investment in aerospace industry. That is very, very important. In the last 5 or 6 years, Mexico has received more aerospace companies than any other country in the world. And we are building a very special nest of opportunities for aerospace industry. The 6th largest exporter of telephones, the 2nd largest of television and refrigerators, largest exporter, the main exporter of avocado, mango, guava, papaya, and tomatoes, and others in the world, main exporter of beer as well, and probably the main exporter of another beverage, quite Mexican and very important. But anyway, so Let me talk a little bit about infrastructure. We are putting in place the biggest infrastructure program in history. And we passed already in the Congress a public-private partnership law, and now we are fostering investment, nearly 5% of GDP. The average in Mexico in the last decade could be like 3% of GDP. Now we are investing, public and private, 5% of GDP, more or less, without housing, which is very important. Even without considering housing, Mexico has 5% of GDP on investment in infrastructure, which is probably 50 billion a year. You can see here in the right side of the graph, the Baluarte Bridge. Probably some of you that could follow the news coming from Vladivostok and the APEC meeting, there was a bridge, and President Putin told us that their bridge, the Russian bridge, is the longest bridge in the world with this technique of the steel cables. But this bridge is not as longer than the Russian one, and I told yesterday to the audience this, but this is the tallest bridge in the world, because from the bridge to the river, you cannot see the river, but there is a river, there are 420 meters high, and it has been made by Mexican engineers. We are really proud about this. Well, and now let me give you an example of what exactly we are doing in infrastructure. You can see several governments, several administrations, one administration coming from 94 to 2000, other 2000 to 2006, and the last, my administration from 2006 to 2012. So we have built or rebuilt 20,000 kilometers of highways or roads in the country. That implies, for instance, which is more than the two previous administrations combined in Mexico. Or another way to see that is we have built or rebuilt a distance equivalent to the distance between the North Pole and the South Pole in the country. Finally, the social policy achievements. We are investing in people, and it's very important for us. One achievement we reached in this administration is universal health coverage. So we have right now, by first time ever, a doctor, medicine, treatment, and hospital for any single Mexican who needs these services. We are increasing the coverage, and in order to do so, we have built more than 1,200 new hospitals or clinics in the country, and rebuilt more than 2,000 more. Another achievement was in education. We reached, by first time ever as well, universal coverage in primary education. Today, any kid between 5 or 13 years old has a seat in a public school, free education, free tuition education. And now we have built in higher education or superior education, we have built from Greenfield 140 new universities and campuses and new buildings in almost 100 more universities. And finally, social protection. One of the most important programs we have is Oportunidades, and this is a program of conditioned transfer. Conditioned to the parents need to bring the kids to the doctor and to the school in order to receive a support for the poorest family. Well, that could be my comments, and I know there will be a session of question and answers. I just want to emphasize that we are being part right now of this tremendous effort of negotiation in a global scale in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, the TPP, and Mexico wants to play an important role with Singapore in terms of trade, exchange, investment, and that is the reason why we are here in this beautiful country. Mexico is opportunity for business. Mexico means opportunity. We are growing, generating jobs. but in particular we are transforming our economy in a more competitive one and able to generate the jobs that Mexican people need. So thank you for your attention, and I will be listening your questions and trying to answer them. Thank you, and bon appetit.